Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Bob Costas. Robert Quinlan Costas is an American sportscaster, on the air for NBC Sports television since the early 1980s. He was the prime-time host of 12 Olympic Games, from 1992 until 2016. Costas currently does play-by-play for MLB Network, and hosts an interview show called Studio 42 with Bob Costas. Early life. Costas was born in Queens, New York City, and grew up in Comac, New York. He is the son of Jane, of Irish descent, and John George Costas, an electrical engineer of Greek descent. His father's ancestry can be traced back to the island of Kalymnos in the Aegean Sea in Greece. He graduated from Comac High School South and attended Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York. Early career. In 1973, Costas began his professional career at TV and radio in Syracuse, while still completing his communications degree at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications. His sportscasting career began while attending Syracuse University, serving as an announcer for the Syracuse Blazers minor league hockey team playing in the Eastern Hockey League and North American Hockey League. After graduating in 1974, at the age of 22, Costas went to KMOX Radio in St. Louis, Missouri, calling play-by-play for the Spirits of St. Louis of the American Basketball Association in 1974. He was a prominent contributor to the ABA book Loose Balls, The Short Wildlife of the American Basketball Association. He is extensively quoted on many topics. The book includes his reflections of ABA life during his tenure as radio voice of the Spirits of St. Louis. Later, Costas would call Missouri Tigers basketball and co-host KMOX's Open Line call-in program. He did play-by-play for Chicago Bulls broadcasts on WGN-TV during the 1979-1980 NBA season. He was also employed by CBS Sports as a regional CBS NFL and CBS NBA announcer from 1976 to 1979, after which he moved to NBC Sports. When Costas was hired by NBC, Don Ohlmeyer, who at the time ran the network's sports division, told the then 28-year-old Costas that he looked like a 14-year-old. Costas would recite this anecdote during an appearance on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Ohlmeyer based his reaction on Costas' modest stature and boyish, baby-faced appearance. For many years, Costas hosted NBC's National Football League coverage and NBA coverage. He also did play-by-play for National Basketball Association and Major League Baseball coverage. With the introduction of the NBC Sports network, Costas also became the host of the new monthly interview program Costas Tonight. Boxing. On March 30, 2015, it was announced that Costas would join forces with Marv Albert and Al Michaels on the April 11, 2015 edition of NBC's primetime PBC on NBC boxing series. Costas was added to serve as a special contributor for the event, from Barclays Center in Brooklyn. He would narrate and write a feature on the storied history of boxing in New York City. Major League Baseball. For baseball telecasts, Costas teamed with Sal Bando, Tony Kubek, and Joe Morgan and Bob Uecker. One of his most memorable broadcasts occurred on June 23, 1984. Costas, along with Tony Kubek, was calling the Saturday baseball game of the week from Chicago's Wrigley Field. The game between the Chicago Cubs and St. Louis Cardinals in particular was cited for putting Ryne Sandberg on the map. In the ninth inning, the Cubs, trailing 9-8, faced the premier relief pitcher of the time, Bruce Sutter. Sandberg, then not known for his power, slugged a home run to left field against the Cardinals' ace closer. Despite this dramatic act, the Cardinals scored 2 runs in the top of the 10th. Sandberg came up again in the 10th inning, facing a determined Sutter with 1 man on base. Sandberg then shocked the national audience by hitting a second home run, even farther into the left field bleachers, to tie the game again. The Cubs went on to win in the 11th inning. When Sandberg hit that second home run, Costas said, "Do you believe it?" The Cardinals' Willie McGee hit for the cycle in the same game. While hosting Game 4 of the 1988 World Series between the Los Angeles Dodgers and Oakland Athletics on NBC, Costas angered many members of the Dodgers by commenting before the start of the game that the Dodgers quite possibly were about to put up the weakest hitting lineup in World Series history. That comment ironically fired up the Dodgers' competitive spirit. Later, after the Dodgers had won Game 4, Lasorda sarcastically suggested the MVP of the 1988 World Series should be Bob Costas. Besides calling the 1989 American League Championship Series for NBC, Costas also filled in for a suddenly ill Vince Scully, who had come down with laryngitis, for Game 2 of the 1989 National League Championship Series alongside Tom Seaver. Game 2 of the NLCS took place on Thursday, October 5, which was an off day for the ALCS. NBC then decided to fly Costas from Toronto to Chicago to substitute for Scully on Thursday night. Afterward, Costas flew back to Toronto, where he resumed work on the ALCS the next night. Costas anchored NBC's pre- and post-game shows for NFL broadcasts and the pre- and post-game shows for numerous World Series and Major League Baseball All-Star games during the 1980s. Costas did not get a shot at doing play-by-play for an All-Star game until 1994 and a World Series until 1995, when NBC regained Major League Baseball rights after a 4-year hiatus. It was not until 1997 when Costas finally got to do play-by-play for a World Series from start to finish. Costas ended up winning a Sports Emmy Award for Outstanding Sports Personality, play-by-play. In 1999, Costas teamed with his then NBC colleague Joe Morgan to call 2 weekday night telecasts for ESPN. The first was on Wednesday, August 25, with Detroit Tigers playing against the Seattle Mariners. The second was on Tuesday, September 21, with the Atlanta Braves playing against the New York Mets. NASCAR. In November 2017, it was announced that Costas would, alongside Chris Tavoda, co-anchor NBC's pre-race coverage leading into the NASCAR Cup Series finale from Homestead. In addition to hosting pre-race coverage, Costas would conduct a live interview with incoming NBC broadcaster Dale Earnhardt Jr., who was running his final race. National Basketball Association. When NBC gained the NBA Network contract from CBS in 1990, Costas hosted the telecasts and was teamed in the studio with ex-Lakers coach Pat Riley. He also hosted the studio program Showtime and did play-by-play for the 1991 All-Star Game. In 1997, Costas began a 3-year stint as the lead play-by-play man for the NBA on NBC. NBC enlisted Costas' services after they were forced to remove Marv Albert from their broadcasts due to lingering personal and legal problems at the time. Costas teamed with Isaiah Thomas and Doug Collins for NBA telecasts from 1997 to 2000. He stepped aside following the 2000 NBA Finals in favor of the returning Albert. While this, in essence, ended his active role on the NBA on NBC program, Costas would return to do play-by-play for selected playoff games. He returned to call some games of the 2002 NBA playoffs after Albert was injured in a car accident 2 days before the playoffs. Costas also co-anchored NBC's NBA Finals coverage in 2002, which was their last to date. Professional football. NBC Sports allowed Costas to opt out from having to cover the XFL. He publicly denigrated the league throughout its existence and remains a vocal critic of the league and its premise. In 2006, Costas returned to NFL studio hosting duties for NBC's new Sunday Night Football, hosting its pre-game show Football That Night in America. Costas last hosted NFL telecasts for NBC in 1992 before being replaced in the studio by Jim Lampley and subsequently, Greg Gumbel. Before becoming the studio host for the NFL on NBC in 1984, Costas did play-by-play of NFL games with analyst Bob Trumpy. Costas is nicknamed Rapping Roberto by New York City's Daily News sports media columnist Bob Raceman. Al Michaels also called him Rapping Roberto during the telecast between the Indianapolis Colts and the New York Giants on September 10, 2006, in response to Costas calling him Alfalfa. National Hockey League. Costas hosted NBC's coverage of the 2008, 2009, and the 2010 NHL Winter Classic. He was scheduled to host coverage of the 2011 event as well, but, due to the game's postponement, Costas only hosted pre-game coverage before leaving to go to Seattle for his duties with NBC's NFL coverage the next night. He hosted the event in 2012 as well as a post-game edition of NHL Live on the NBC Sports network. Olympics, 1988-2016. Costas has frontlined many Olympics broadcasts for NBC. They include the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary and 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, Barcelona in 1992, Atlanta in 1996, Sydney in 2000, Salt Lake City in 2002, Athens in 2004, Torino in 2006, Beijing in 2008, Vancouver in 2010, London in 2012, Sochi in 2014 and Rio in 2016. He discusses his work on the Olympic telecasts extensively in a book by Andrew Billings entitled Olympic Media, Inside the Biggest Show on Television. A personal influence on Costas has been legendary ABC Sports broadcaster Jim McKay, who hosted many Olympics for ABC from the 1960s to the 1980s. During the 1992 Barcelona and 1996 Atlanta opening ceremonies, Costas' remarks on China's team's possible drug use caused an uproar among the American, Chinese and international communities. Thousands of dollars were raised to purchase ads in The Washington Post and Sunday The New York Times, featuring an image of the head of a statue of Apollo and reading, "Costas poisoned Olympic spirit, public protests NBC." However, Costas' comments were made subsequent to the suspension of Chinese coach Zhou Ming after 7 of his swimmers were caught using steroids in 1994. Further evidence of Chinese athletes' drug use came in 1997 when Australian authorities confiscated 13 vials of somatropin, a human growth hormone, from the bag of Chinese swimmer Yuan upon her arrival for the 1997 World Swimming Championships. At the World Championships, 4 Chinese swimmers tested positive for the banned substance triamterene, a diuretic used to dilute urine samples to mask the presence of anabolic steroids. Including these failed drug tests, 27 Chinese swimmers were caught using performance-enhancing drugs from 1990 through 1997, more than the rest of the world combined. Along with co-host Meredith Vieira and Matt Lauer, Costas' commentary of the 2012 Summer Olympics opening ceremonies came under fierce criticism, with Costas being described as making a series of jingoistic remarks, including a joke about Idi Amin when Uganda's team appeared, and the combined commentary as being ignorant and banal. Following the Olympics, Costas appeared on Conan O'Brien's talk show and jokingly criticized his employer for its decision to air a preview of the upcoming series Animal Practice over a performance by The Who during the London closing ceremonies. So here is the balance NBC has to consider: The Who, Animal Practice. Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend, monkey in a lab coat. I'm sure you'd be the first to attest, Conan, that when it comes to the tough calls, NBC usually gets them right, Costas said, alluding at the end to O'Brien's involvement in the 2010 Tonight Show conflict. An eye infection Costas had at the start of the 2014 Winter Olympics forced him, on February 11, 2014, to cede his Olympic hosting duties to Matt Lauer and Meredith Vieira, the first time Costas had not done so at all since the 1998 Winter Olympics. Retirement from main on-air positions. On February 9, 2017, Costas announced during Today that he had begun the process of stepping down from his main on-air roles at NBC Sports, announcing in particular that he would cede his role as primetime host for NBC's Olympics coverage to Mike Tirico, and that he would host Super Bowl 52 as his final Super Bowl. However, Costas ultimately dropped out of the coverage entirely. USA Today reported that he would similarly step down from football that night in America in favor of Tirico. Costas explained that he was not outright retiring and expected to take on a role at NBC Sports similar to that of Tom Brokaw, being an occasional special correspondent to the division. He explained that his decision opens up more time to do the things that I feel I'm most connected to. There will still be events, features, and interviews where I can make a significant contribution at NBC, but it will also leave more time for baseball, And then, at some point down the road, I'll have a chance to do more of the long-form programming I enjoy. Costas told USA Today that his gradual retirement was planned in advance, and that he did not want to announce it during the 2016 Summer Olympics or the NFL season, because it would be too disruptive, and joked that, "I'm glad that Sochi wasn't the last one. You wouldn't want your Pink Olympics to be your last Olympics." Talk show hosting. Costas hosted the syndicated radio program Costas Coast to Coast from 1986 to 1996, which was revived as Costas on the Radio. Costas on the Radio, which ended its 3-year run on May 31, 2009, aired on 200 stations nationwide each weekend and syndicated by the Clear Channel-owned Premier Radio Networks. During that period, Costas also served as the imagined voice of Clear Channel-owned Clue in St. Louis, Missouri, during that station's period as My 103.3. Like later, Costas' radio shows have focused on a wide variety of topics and have not been limited to sports discussion. Costas hosted later with Bob Costas on NBC from 1988 until 1994. This late-night show created by Dick Ebersol, coming on at 1:30 a.m. as the third program in NBC's nightly lineup after The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and Late Night with David Letterman, was something of a break from the typical TV talk show format of the era, featuring Costas and a single guest conversing for the entire half hour, without a band, opening monologue or studio audience. On several occasions, Costas held the guest over for multiple nights, and these in-depth discussions won Costas much praise for his sycophant interviewing skills. The show was taped in GE Building Studios 3B or 8H at the Rockefeller Plaza, with Costas interviewing the guest for 45 minutes to an hour before turning the material over to editors who condensed it down to 22 minutes plus commercial breaks. More popular guests were given 2- or 3-part interviews that ran consecutive nights. In August 1991, Mel Brooks became the only guest for 4 consecutive nights in the series' history. The program was critically acclaimed, and twice nominated for Emmys during its year run, with Costas as host. It won the Emmy Award for Best Informational Series in 1993. In June 2005, Costas was named by CNN President Jonathan Klein as a regular substitute anchor for Larry King's Larry King Live for 1 year. Costas, as well as Klein, have said Costas was not trying out for King's position on a permanent basis. Nancy Grace was also named a regular substitute host for the show. On August 18, 2005, Costas refused to host the Larry King live broadcast where the subject was missing teenager Natalie Holloway. Costas said that, because there were no new developments in the story, he felt it had no news value, and he was uncomfortable with television's drift in the direction of tabloid-type stories. Beginning in October 2011, Costas was a correspondent for Rock Center with Brian Williams. He gained acclaim for his November 2011 live interview of former Pennsylvania State University assistant coach Jerry Sandusky concerning charges of sexual abuse of minors, in which Sandusky called in to deny the charges. Costas hosts a monthly talk show Costas Tonight on NBC Sports Network. HBO Sports. In 2001, Costas was hired by HBO to host a 12-week series called On the Record with Bob Costas. On the Record with Bob Costas was similar to the format of the old later program as they both concentrated on in-depth interviews. In 2005, On the Record with Bob Costas was revamped to become Costas Now, a monthly issue-oriented sports program that occasionally employed a town hall-style format. In 2002, Costas began a stint as co-host of HBO's long-running series Inside the NFL. Costas remained host of Inside the NFL through the end of the 2007 NFL season. He hosted the show with Chris Collinsworth and former NFL legends Dan Marino and Chris Carter. The program aired each week during the NFL season. Costas left HBO to sign with MLB Network in February 2009. MLB Network. At the channel's launch on January 1, 2009, Costas hosted the premiere episode of All Time Games, a presentation of the recently discovered kinescope of Game 5 of the 1956 World Series. During the episode, he held a forum with Don Larson, who pitched MLB's only postseason perfect game during that game. and Yogi Berra, who caught the game. Costas joined the network full-time on February 3, 2009. He hosts a regular interview show titled MLB Network Studio 42 with Bob Costas, as well as special programming, and provides play-by-play for select live baseball game telecasts. In 2017, Costas called Game 1 of the American League Division Series between the Boston Red Sox and the Houston Astros on MLB Network. The Astros went on to win 8-2. Unfortunately, Costas and his color commentator Jim Cart received criticism for their bantering about minutiae and misidentification of plays. Costas also went on to become an internet meme after using the term "the sacks were juiced" to describe the bases being loaded. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?